everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stevenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. And today we are joined by Dave Tenney, the president and CEO of the National Alliance of Forest Owners. He's going to be discussing with us forestry as a natural climate solution. Dave, thank you for joining me today.
Seth, I'm delighted to be in Arkansas.
Awesome. That's good. And yes, that is something that we were happy when we sent out our message, because we know you guys have a busy schedule while you're here. So we were glad that you were able to make some time and sit down with me to kind of talk about our topic today.
Well, I'm ready. So let's talk.
It's a long pause there, but I'm going to take it and run with it. So before we continue on here, I want to give a special thank you to this month's sponsor, PotlatchDeltic. We'll hear more from them later on in this episode. Well, Dave, as always in our show with a new guest, we kind of want to give you an opportunity to tell us who you are, your history in the industry, and how you got to where you are. So let the people know who you are.
Well, I am the founding president and CEO of the National Alliance of Forest Owners. We're not quite as old as the Arkansas Forestry Association, not quite to 75. We've been around for 14 years. NAFO started in 2008. Anybody in forestry knows that 2008 was the worst year to start anything. That just goes to show that NAFO was an idea that was timely. It was the right time at the right place with the right group. NAFO represents private forest owners in federal policy, federal advocacy, and we're created and we live to tell the story of private working forests to everyone and anyone that matters in federal policy.
Okay, and if you don't mind, I mean, what was you said you're the founding president and CEO. Why did you find that this was something that you needed to create? What made you come out and say, I need to create this organization?
Well, years ago, integrated companies sold their forest land. And there was a lot of private working forest land in the U.S. that hadn't been organized into a place. We needed a place to huddle to do federal advocacy. NAFO came into being when that group realized the need. I was working at the Department of Agriculture in the Bush administration. I had spent a year at the American Forest and Paper Association, and NAFO was a compelling idea. The idea of bringing private working forest owners together to solve solutions or to solve problems and provide solutions to important national needs was compelling. And I think it was compelling for me especially because I grew up in Idaho. I have loved the forests since I was a kid, and it's always been in my blood, and I get to do it every day. So I'm the luckiest guy on earth.
Okay. And I know we've been talking, AFA's been talking with you a lot here lately, especially last year we had you at our annual meeting talking about this topic. But before we kind of get into that, can you just tell us maybe what are some of NAFO's success stories or past issue or policy successes that you guys have seen?
Well, I think that the success of NAFO starts with the story that we're trying to tell. We can boil down everything that we do into one sentence. Healthy markets provide clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and good paying rural jobs. Everything that we do fits in that sentence. If it doesn't fit in that sentence, it really doesn't fit. And so our success has come from being focused on that objective, helping everyone and anyone who matters in federal policy understand that healthy markets provide clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, and good paying rural jobs. The successes we've had in the past have actually evolved over time. When we began, we were defending ourselves against things that could harm the operations of private working forests. And we worked through a number of difficult issues. Many will remember the issue of forest roads and the efforts of some to regulate forest roads as a point source pollution under the Clean Water Act. Well, we resolved that through the Supreme Court. We resolved that through legislation in Congress, and that is now behind us. But what we've done over time is we've pivoted from defending ourselves to positioning ourselves as a solution for clean air, as a solution for clean water, as a solution for wildlife habitat, and certainly as a solution for employment and economic prosperity and well-being in rural communities.
So you guys are doing similar stuff to what we're doing here in the state, just on a much higher level, advocating for the forest owners and the landowners out there in Arkansas and all across the country.
Absolutely. And I have to say that we wouldn't go very far if it weren't for our friends in Arkansas and in every other state. We work very closely with the Arkansas Forestry Association because you know what's going on in this state far better than we. And if we understand what's important to the people of Arkansas, we will understand what's important to the congressional delegation from Arkansas. And when we know that and knit that together with what we know from other states and their delegations, that's a winning combination. So the relationship that we have with our friends at the state level is absolutely fundamental to everything that we do.
And that begs the question then too, I guess, are you guys talking with other state associations, other companies on a pretty regular basis just to kind of get that feedback to help fuel what you guys are doing?
Absolutely. All the time. And that is a very synergistic relationship. Our companies, when you look at NAFO's ownership, we are found in 34 states, 134 congressional districts. And because of that, when we're talking to our friends at the local level, at the state level, or their delegations, we have to speak every political dialect in this country. Our membership has ownerships in very bright red states, in very bright blue states, and purple states. And so what that means is that we've learned how to tell the story of private working forests, forest products, all the many benefits they provide to improve the lives of Americans across this country in a way that appeals to Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And so far, that's been a winning combination.
And I know you've mentioned telling your story. That's been a big thing that we've been preaching essentially on this show, is being able to tell our story, because if we don't, someone else will. And who knows better than what we're doing on the forest land than the people who own it, the people who are working it. So I'm glad that kind of we're all on the same page of we got to tell our story so we can progress through any challenges that arise. Well, let's kind of hop into, Dave, if you don't mind, just the main topic for today, and that is forestry as a natural climate solution. So I guess the very first thing we need to do is explain what that means. What does forestry as a natural climate solution mean to NAFO?
Well, we start with the idea that our private working forests, the forests that are managed by good people across this country, have always been a solution to a variety of societal needs. Climate change is now a societal need that's recognized by Republicans and Democrats and people from all walks of life. The core of addressing climate change is how do we pull more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere than we put into it. Mm-hmm. That's really it. What better source for a solution than our forests and our wood products? Our forests that are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, our wood products that are storing it for long periods of time. Anybody who's looking for a solution will naturally see the value of private working forests and wood products. And so as we look at our position and our role, it's to help members of Congress, people in the administration who make important decisions, and anyone else who needs to know who might influence those policymakers. We teach them the role of our forests and our wood products in providing those solutions. And the data are compelling. If we were to take just a step back and look at the data, they are compelling. Think about the land base in the United States for a moment. We have about 765 million acres of forest in our country. That's about a third of the land base in our country is in trees. And if we take a step back and look at those forests in context, what we find is about just under half of those forests, about 47% of those forests are private working forests like those managed by good people in the state of Arkansas. What is that 40%? What is that 47% of our forest land base doing? Well, first of all, it's providing 90% of the harvest for forest products that produce our homes and paper and packaging, and 5,000 or so different products that make our lives better every day. 90% of our timber harvest is coming from our private working forests. On the carbon front, they're sequestering 75% of the carbon that our forests in our country sequester each year. So 75% of all that carbon that's being sucked out of the atmosphere is coming through these private working forests that are providing 90% of our timber harvest. They're storing well over half of all the carbon that's stored in our forests. This is a juggernaut. This is the best story for addressing climate change in our country today. And it doesn't even stop there. If you consider how much carbon is stored in our private working forests today, it's enough carbon to overcome the carbon emissions of all of the fossil fuel power plants in this country for 82 years. And then if you look at the amount of carbon that's stored in products like our homes or in other types of buildings, there's more carbon stored in those products than all of our national parks combined. In fact, nearly 3 times as much carbon is stored in forest products than all of our national parks combined. When you combine the story of forests and wood products, it's unmatched anywhere in this country. And so it's really easy to use the data to create a very compelling narrative that's so compelling that policymakers want to adopt it as part of their own. When they do, and when they decide to act on that narrative, then we know that we've created something that's really relevant, something that's really going to compel policy in a way that is going to be helpful to people in rural communities who are already making a tremendous contribution to solving climate change in this country.
So has the data been your biggest asset in telling this story and getting this message across to people on Capitol Hill?
Data don't lie. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Hey, that's fair.
And I will add that if you want to see the data, if you want to see what the story looks like, go to www.forestcarbondataviz.org. That's forestcarbondataviz.org. And you will see the story of forest carbon, private working forest carbon in the United States, and the contributions that it makes. It's compelling. Anybody who looks at it comes away with the same conclusion. Wow, I didn't know. And if you like to geek out on data, you can pull down the tabs on the side and you can geek out on data as much as you want. But the storyline is compelling. It's the story that policymakers, that people in rural communities, that people in urban communities, that people all over the country really want to hear and know. And everyone comes away from their experience with the DataViz tool with the same outcome. I didn't know. And that is compelling. And I'd like to learn more. And there's something here that can really help.
So it's a good jumping off point for anyone just interested to see what exactly is going on.
Yeah, if we want to start a conversation about policy, let's start with what the data are telling us. And the good news about this data is it's not our data. Mm-hmm. We're not making it up. This is data that's coming from the Forest Service and from the EPA. This is data that's being gathered and reported by the government, and all we've done is taken the data and told the story that it's telling.
Okay. Well, we will make sure that we get that link in the description of this episode. So once again, it's forestcarbondataviz.org. Like I said, that'll be in the description of this episode if you'd like to take a quick look at that. But right now, Dave, I think we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to hear from our sponsor this month, PotlatchDeltic.
At PotlatchDeltic, we know Arkansas, our forest, our land, and our people. We are here in Arkansas every day, sustainably managing timberland, producing lumber, developing Chenal properties, neighborhoods, and selling recreational real estate. If you're interested in having a place of your own for hunting, hiking, fishing, or just relaxing, visit our website at potlatchdelticlandsales.com.
Thank you once again to our sponsor this month, PotlatchDeltic. We really appreciate their support of the show. So, Dave, let's kind of bring everything we've been talking about on a national level. Let's bring it down to Arkansas a little bit, if you don't mind. You've mentioned some of the private landowners being a part of this, whether they may know it or not. But one of the things that we've seen here in the state recently is Structureland. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention them and the wood products innovation that they're bringing to the state and just to the country. So I guess, what are some of the more compelling stories that you've seen coming out of our state? I'm sure that includes Structureland and maybe a couple others.
Let's talk about the vision of building with wood that's coming out of the Fay Jones School of Architecture. If you think about that vision, it's a vision where we are using locally grown U.S. wood to build the infrastructure of tomorrow in ways that are preserving our forests, in ways that are providing all the benefits, both environmental and economic, that those forests provide, and that are beautiful and good for the well-being of the people who live in and work in these buildings. So in comes Structureland. This is a very compelling story. This connects all the dots of the narrative that I was describing earlier. You have a company that cares about its employees and cares about the state where it's located. That company has made the decision that it's going to help solve climate change, at least in part by building a campus that's made out of wood that's grown in Arkansas, using a new technology, cross-laminated timber, to build a campus that's going to last a long time and store a lot of carbon in that wood. Mm-hmm. Structureland comes in, and in partnership with Walmart, provides the material using southern yellow pine from the great state of Arkansas to build this campus. Well, what does that do? That creates a compelling story about the connection between forests and rural communities and markets and climate change and the well-being of people who live and work in buildings made out of wood. That can be replicated over and over and over again. Any policymaker who comes to the great state of Arkansas is going to see that and is going to say, wow, that is something new, that's visionary, and I can get behind that. And that's certainly the experience we had when we visited the Structureland facility. It was an inspiring thing, not just to see how the process worked, but the enthusiasm of the employees who worked there, knowing that they were part of something big and something important for the future of Arkansas and for the future of the planet. Now, that's inspiring. When you can inspire people with what you do, because it's bigger than who you are and what you are, that's going to make it relevant in ways that will drive policy in this country.
You bring up a good point. I was on the tour with you guys the day before this recording, and I didn't clock it then, but I notice it now that there is a sense of pride coming from the workers there, doing what they're doing. They know what they're doing, and there's that pride there that they were proud of what they were doing with Arkansas product going to an Arkansas homegrown business. So I think that's an interesting point that you've made.
You know, there's another story here, and this is what we anticipate, and we're already starting to hear it. Sure, we can build with wood, and we can build with more wood than we have in the past, and maybe we can even use wood as a fundamental solution for climate change. But what happens if we use too much wood? Isn't that bad for the forest? And this is where the story of private working forests and markets and climate change comes into play. We have this little formula that we like to use: markets plus trees plus wood equals mitigation at scale when it comes to climate change. And here's what we've learned just from the data, again, over time. If you think about what's happened in our country since the late 1950s, we experienced an economic expansion in our country unlike anything in the history of the world. And that included unprecedented demand for products to build homes and to provide consumer goods that we use every day and to package those goods. Unprecedented expansion in our economy, unprecedented demand on our forests. What happened to the forests? Well, our forest land base remains stable. We're not losing forest land base in our country. It's remained stable or slightly increasing over time. But what's happened in those forests is even more compelling. We have 60% more wood volume in our forests today than we had in the late 1950s. Why? Because each successive generation of trees has been better, and we are growing more wood in our forests today than we ever have. Now, that's both a blessing and a curse, as we know in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Arkansas has become really good at growing wood, and we've heard about the wall of wood. And the wall of wood is an opportunity, but it's also a challenge because we need markets to sustain those forests and keep that wall of wood turning into walls and buildings, and not turning into other things that might not be as helpful for resolving climate change or providing the solutions that society wants. So what we want to accomplish, based on what we've learned from history, is to increase the markets for our forest products, because that's only going to be good for the forest and is going to produce more rather than fewer trees. The data show that. It's very compelling to anybody who looks at it, and it tells a story that people can get behind, because they already know from experience that if we have more markets, we're going to have more trees, and if we have more trees, there's more climate solutions, and by the way, we're going to have more clean water, we're going to have more wildlife habitat, and we're going to have more good paying jobs.
I can already hear the clacking away at keyboards of those out there that are pretty against managing the forest. You guys have heard it. We've heard it all the time. But, maybe I'm addressing this question towards them or just anyone in general. But in your opinion, why should the public feel good about stories like Structure Lamb or some of these other stories that we're telling across the state or even here in Arkansas?
Well, the simplest answer to your question is it always comes back to the data. People need to be confident in the integrity of the outcomes that we hope to achieve. Well, that's why we have data, because data provides the answers to the questions that are most important on people's minds. Now, people can choose not to agree with the data or not even believe the data, but the data speaks for itself. And so if we're really looking at taking carbon out of the atmosphere, more than we're putting into the atmosphere, and we consider the fact that our private working forests that are producing 90% of our timber harvest each year are taking out of the atmosphere enough carbon to offset all of the passenger vehicle emissions in our country each year, how can you argue with that? Because that data is telling us that we have a solution in hand. And if you look at the historic data that shows that when we have strong markets, we're going to grow more trees, why wouldn't we want to continue to use that solution and expand that solution? Because history tells us that we can. So if we continue to go back to the data and look at what the data is telling us, we are going to have a compelling story that will be relevant and that will win at the end of the day. And I think we're finding that policymakers are already agreeing with that on both sides of the aisle.
And that's good. That's a good first step, is the people who are out there, writing the laws, making the laws, they're on board with this. So that's excellent to hear on our front. So, Dave, as we finish this whole conversation up, one other thing that I wanted to ask you is a topic that we have started to hear more and more of, or I guess a phrase we're starting to hear more and more of, is climate smart forestry. What exactly is climate smart forestry? Just for those out there who may have heard it a lot like us lately, or who this is the first time they're hearing it.
Sometimes a new term comes into the scene, and the term is used before it's even defined. Climate smart forestry falls into that category.
Okay.
So right now there's a new term that's not defined, and people are trying to understand what climate smart forestry means. Well, let's talk about what some people think. Some people think that climate smart forestry means that we are not doing enough and we need to change practices so that we can do more. So this practice is good and that's climate smart, and that practice is not, and that's not climate smart. So we have to make sure that forest owners are only doing this practice or that practice in order to be climate smart. It's a very myopic view of what climate smart could be. We look at climate smart as the outcomes. Is the story of private working forests and forest products in our country climate smart today? Absolutely. The data are telling us that. Would it be smart for us to continue to use our forests and our wood products to create even more carbon mitigation outcomes that will help us address climate change? Yes, that's climate smart. And so if we think about what climate smart means, it means taking the information that we have today about the outcomes of what we're doing, things that we have been doing for a long time, and then asking the question, would it be smart for us to continue that or even improve or increase it going forward? Now that's climate smart, because what we're doing at the end of the day, is taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're putting into it. That's what's going to help us address climate change. And so if we can continue to do that with the resources that we have in this state and other forested states across the country that are managed by good people who understand what sustainability means, who are going out there every day to make their forests the kind of solution for their communities and for this nation that they've been doing for a long time, that's smart. And so sometimes smart is simply doing a good thing and doing it even better for even greater outcomes. And I think that's where we need to go with this idea of climate smart. And I think that we're getting a lot of traction. A lot of people are agreeing with that idea.
All right. Well, Dave, is there anything else that I may have forgotten to ask or anything that you want to add before we kind of close things up here?
Okay. If you look at the private working forests in the state of Arkansas, these forests are storing about 3.3 billion metric tons of carbon. Now, what does that mean? It's kind of hard to get your head around it, except that 3.3 billion metric tons of carbon stored in our forests in Arkansas is about half of the industrial emissions of the United States in a year. That's a lot of carbon, and that carbon is being stored in these trees that are continuing to sequester more carbon each year. That's an important carbon storage pool, and that's going to be an important part of the climate change solution in the state of Arkansas.
It all comes back to the data, folks. If you've learned anything from this episode, look at the data. It's there. It's out there. That's going to be our best storytelling tool. Well, Dave, I want to thank you once again for joining us today. We really appreciate you guys making time and talking to us about this very important topic that I know a lot of people have been asking us about. So thank you guys for stopping by.
It's been a pleasure, Seth. Thanks for having us in the state of Arkansas.
Anytime. Well, we want to thank you guys for joining us this month as well. Again, we are going to have that link to the data that Dave mentioned earlier in the description of this episode. But if you want it again, it's forestcarbondataviz.org. And if you want more information about the Arkansas Forestry Association, you can find us at arkforest.org. That's ARKFORESTS.org. And as always, we want to give a special shout out to some guy named Rob McCormick for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. That's off of his album, The Folkster. You can find more of his music on Spotify, and we'll have a link to his website as well. He's a great musician and a great friend here of the Forestry Association. And we want to give another special thank you to PotlatchDeltic for being our sponsor this month. We really appreciate the support that they've shown for the show. Well, join us next month when we have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.